Yo, what is up, YouTube family? It is I, the Libertarian Metaverse here. Yeah, let's get right into it, man. In today's video, we're gonna be talking about the situation with Hispanic American nations. I'm gonna be explaining about why are they still doing poor in economic development. Um, yeah, so I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Be sure to like, rate, comment, subscribe. And yeah, man, let's break this down. We got some pretty good videos that I wanted to bang out. Cause, like I'm kind of half asleep and I figured, before I go to work later on today, I can at least get some good work in. So yeah, man, let's break this down. Yeah, let's just say, at least within like the past, like 200 plus years, if not probably even more. I'll even go back to before colonization and after, colonial wars. Before colonization, obviously, with a lot of the American Indian civilizations in South America, heading into Central and the Caribbean, and I would probably say the North, but I mean, we're really just talking about like the Hispanic slash Portuguese territories, and that would be mostly from the Caribbean leading to the Central and South American bordered nations. Now, don't get it twisted, not every American Indian tribe is built the same way, but let's just say, honestly, on a general scale, a good portion of tribes were not heavily, advanced, but they still had their, systems of lifestyles put in place where they did a very good job managing their resources to a good certain degree, but the ones that were not surviving were the ones that were doing a lot of unethical, uncivil like practices of lifestyle, in which that would be considered savage, according to what Europeans would say. But when you flip it, it's more to do with what these people believed in. Now, let's talk about the bigger base empires that were actually statists. Those empires were mostly the Aztecs, in which that's only one tribe out of many different tribes in Mexico, by the way, because the Olmec tribe was technically one of the very first nations in Mexico. But the issue with the Olmecs was that the Olmecs were like a mix of many different tribal members that came from different generations. And people would say that the Olmec tribe is dead in Mexico, but honestly, it's really not. Like the Olmec civilization, like their bloodline lives on, and they're able to do what they're supposed to do because they have everything put in place to be, basically known for who they are for their people. So I think honestly they used to call themselves the Olmecs. But then I think what ended up happening is that the Olmec tribe ended up passing their genes to a different tribe, that being the Aztecs, and then they probably spread out to let the Otomi tribe, the Zapotec tribe, let the Mipatec tribe, or whatever tribes that were out there. I'm not so sure about that tribe, the Mipatec. I think that's a tribal name that I got mixed up with. I'm sorry if I butchered, the name, but I do know that there's Zapotec, there is Aztec, in which is not supposed to be called Aztec. It's actually supposed to be called Aztlan. But I think Aztec was a more modernized vision of what the word Aztlan was supposed to be, because Aztlan is called Atzlan. So Aztlan. So Aztecal is actually Aztec, but it's basically a shortened version without the letter L, because like, to make this simple, like Nahuatl language was a pretty deep language throughout the American Indian tribes within Mexico. And there's over, like a million speakers that still speak it now in Mexico, which makes up at least, I want to say a good 10 to 15% of the population, and it's still massively growing to this day, which is, very good. But a lot of its rooting is actually mostly centered around a lot of word bases that come from other tribes as well, and that being like the Otemi tribe, the Zapotec tribe, a lot of different Mesoamerican based tribal members, in which that's like a whole different explanation of like what every tribe represented. But I think there was over at least 7 plus tribes, including the Olmec tribe as well, because you have to really like give credibility to the Olmecs, because they were basically one of the very first members that basically started Mexican civilization per se, because Mexicat is basically the early kingdoms of what the Aztecs believed to be their land. But then on top of that, they had other tribes that didn't think like that, and therefore that's where the Mayans and the Aztecs had their differences. And the Mayans, like like as far as like what us libertarians would sometimes say, that that the Mayans could have had anarchist beliefs of being stateless. It's a kind of like a differences of philosophical review, which is really hard to tell. But I think I'm gonna save that for another video to break that down, to say, to talk about the claim, were the Mayans really anarchists, and in our libertarian mindset. So I'll save that for another video one day. But yeah, let's break this down. Yeah, you had like multiple American Indian tribes, that being the Aztecs, the Mayans, the Inca, obviously many other different tribes like the Charrua tribe down in Uruguay. You had the Quetzalcoatl tribe. I think that's located in Honduras. Yeah, I mean, there's multiple tribes, but let's just take a look at the tribes that were heavily authoritarian status. Those are definitely the ones that were pushing for too many wars, too much political centralization, and just not really getting to the point of like actually being together with their people, so they could actually advance society and people can actually be successful in what they do. And like I'll just start with Mexico, because that's a great example. Mexico was always, its own little problem of many other problems, but I would say the biggest downfall that led to a lot of failure within civilization before Europeans even stepped foot into Mexico was just simply political tribalism. And very similar to what North American Indian tribes were doing before Europeans arrived, which not everybody was like that, because that was like over, I want to say, 100+ million American Indians that were sitting on the U.S. land as far as the United States goes. But if you really want to add Canadians on top of that, that's really over like 300 million plus American Indians that were probably thriving at one point with a lot of different ideas and tribal ways of life. But the issue was political infighting and too much political centralization. Did that mean every tribe did that? No, they did not. So, with that principle being applied in North America, I would assume that those ancestors that came from the north that were coming into the south and different parts of the Americas, in which the Americas is not even supposed to be the actual word of the northern hemisphere of the world, or the western hemisphere of the world, because America was really just a word created by an Italian man. I think his name was I forgot his first name. I think his name was Antonio Vespucci, if I'm not mistaken. But pretty much, I'm not really gonna go back and just correct it in the video, but you guys get what I'm saying. Like it was some Italian explorer that basically called it America. And I don't know what the whole meaning behind America was, but that's pretty much what it was called. But to American Indian tribes, especially in North America, they would call it Turtle Island, because Turtle Island was technically viewed as a turtle for the United States, because the United States alone, along with Canada, and you could say South America and the Caribbean, like that was like a whole turtle in a way. But I would probably say that was only mostly viewed as Turtle Island to mostly North America Indian tribes. As far as like South America and Central America and the Caribbean Americas, that was pretty much like a different viewpoint of what they viewed their land, because they were mostly settling on one piece of land that they thought, to their own understanding, is considered their part of their land that they settled. But I'm sure like those that probably studied geography, that wanted to expand philosophy more, they were like, wow, you know what? Actually, no, the world is actually a lot bigger than for what we thought. And honestly, I'm pretty sure American Indian tribes in the Central and South Americas, along with the Caribbean, they had different names of what they called Central and South America and the Caribbean. It's just that many different translations from different tribal societies had a different viewpoint based on, how they, reviewed, the land overall. So, yeah, this is where we kind of get to the nitty gritty. When it came to downfall, the downfall of these societies were obviously very status. Now, a lot of people would say, in terms of how these societies operated off of, they mostly operated off of violence, which is true. A good portion of them were violent, and when Europeans arrived, a lot of these Indian tribes were already going to war with each other. And to my understanding, a lot of European militaries were basically trying to alliance with these tribes, and they were basically trying to find a way to basically continue their wars, but to make them weaker. And then they were to somehow basically trying to win the war in a lot easier manner. Because, remember, like, Europeans coming over to the Americas, they weren't coming over in like millions of people. Like, they were coming over probably like little by little. But when you think about it, like, you can't win a war when you're completely outnumbered. So what do you do in order to fuel more momentum for you to win the war more? You start inserting alliances with those people that you meet, and therefore little by little, you start producing momentum on one side to weaken the other side. And when they start to die out, or they start to be a minority, then you start going after the other, victor, or basically you backstab the alliance that you're quote unquote helping out, and therefore you win. And I think honestly that's really how Europeans were able to get by with quote unquote conquering these lands. Because if you really think about it, if American Indians at that time were actually unifying on principle to resist against European invaders, they would have definitely whipped their ass. Because the truth is like, the main militaries, at the time that were quote unquote such a big threat, it was like Spain, it was France, and it was England. And people like to say the Dutch nations, but no, the Dutch nations were very weak, and they were losing a lot of power every time they were invading, because they were also getting invaded by other colonists as well. So it's like they were getting beat out, by the punch. So it's like Dutch people pretty much made their influence by a little bit, and they didn't really do much with it, because most of their colonies are basically just, meaningless, and they don't really mean anything as far as like a long-term effect. Obviously, they do have a lot of influence in North America, I would say. They have like decent influence in South America, but really, at the end of the day, like, they're basically a dead influence. And that's a good thing, because for me, I'm against colonialism. Like, I hate colonialism. So obviously, me as an ANCAP, I'm going to be very critical against violence and political racketeer groups. So to make this clear, like I try to be as critical as I can against anything that does go against the non-aggression principle, 9 times out of 10. Now, moving back with the European colonial influence, before that even happened, like a lot of these tribes, yes, they were fighting, they were doing a lot of bad things, and when Europeans did arrive, they were forming alliances with tribes that were wanting to take out other tribes. Now, was that a good thing that they did that? I would say no, because what you end up doing is that you start giving in too much to the tribe that you're helping, and they could also backstab you. So that's something that Europeans didn't think through, and therefore they costed that, because those tribes ended up seeing what they were doing, and then they were like, okay, now we get the picture. We understand what you're coming here for. You're coming here so therefore you can find a way to steal our resources and take down our people. And pretty much that's what ended up happening. Like, the wars naturally occurred because it's like, this is statism. This isn't anarchy. And obviously in statism, like a lot of political alliances get formed and they start breaking away as quickly as they do, because these people want to form states. They're not going to be peaceful about it. Now, for people that have actually resisted against statism, like I would say, like I can even use like certain American Indian tribes that have never dealt with European contact, but I think that's a video of its own, just to talk history. But yeah, I would I would say the ones that did and actually resisted against European armies, they actually did a pretty good job, and they were doing a good job until they quote unquote lost and got conquered. But then they're still doing better now. I would even use like the Mayans. Like that's a great example as well, because with like the Mayans, you know, like again going back to my previous point, like some libertarians would consider the Mayans to be anarchists, but others would consider them to be statists. But I think it's honestly like a misconception on both sides, because the thing is like we don't really know what their practices were back then, and I would say that the Mayans actually did believe in anarchism, but it depends on what subnetted tribes at that time were actually on the side of liberty rather than statism. And like as far as like the political invasions go with Spain, I would say that the Spanish, they actually did struggle and lost a lot of power over the Mayans, because little do people know, a lot of the Mayan culture that is still spread today, they're basically like the Irish. When Britain tried conquering Ireland, they didn't really take over Ireland. They really just influenced their ideas over to them, and the people in Ireland that are quote unquote unified with the British to be part of the British crown or the British state, they're really not like together with the British. Like the British are still trying to inflict their violence onto the people, and it's like a Russia Ukraine situation. Like you're not going to tell people what to do, and you're not going to force them under your belief system. So better yet, the Mayans did the same thing with the Spanish after they had successfully defeated Spain multiple times in combat. But once they started losing and they lost a lot of life, mostly due to disease, and I would probably say that the lack of resources in war. I would say that's where what the Mayans were like, okay, well, you know what, like we might as well work in silence. And better yet, they started rebuilding their society a lot better. And I think the Mayans, honestly, as far as descendants go, they're actually producing a lot better success for the ancestry, compared to like Aztec ancestry. Like, yeah, like their ancestry is still there in massive numbers all over Mexico. But I would say that the difference is that the Mayans actually had a good backup plan, and they basically outsmarted the Spanish to actually not assimilate to their society, and they basically divided themselves away from other people that got fooled into believing into Spanish, worldview for colonial thinking. Because that's where you see in Mexico, you see a lot of people that are very divided, but it's there for a particular reason. Because the ones that are white are usually the ones that probably coexisted with colonialism alone, and that's where you see a lot of these mixed white Hispanics, because these are people that are probably were either one forced into a forced sexual marriage or of some sort, and sadly, obviously with rape and violence and all that, like that does factor into it, and I don't want to get into that. Like that's obviously like stupid, but it's like, you know, like y'all get the picture. Like you understand that any colonial army that does crazy stuff like that, they usually end up failing because they start creating all these like political class, caste systems, and therefore it doesn't really help nobody. It like it actually fuels uh, you know another how should I say, it fuels another incentive for civil war, for other political revolutions. So yeah, to make this easier, heading into other civilizations like the Inca and the other tribes, I would even say like tribes in South America and the Caribbean, like these tribes had different beliefs, and they had obviously different ways of seeing life, but the whole deal of it is mainly due to the fact that you start prioritizing a different manner of organizing society. And I would say honestly what really ended up happening for a lot of these statist tribes was that they weren't modernizing society to become more decentralized. And I say like if they started working in a more decentralized field where they didn't have political rulership and they weren't telling people what to do, then their societies would have massively grown a lot faster. And if they had practiced more of a decentralized, anarcho-capitalist worldview of being more independent and forming more black markets to help each other out and actually innovate more technology a lot faster, then yes, like Europeans would have easily been destroyed, because it's like there's nothing to take over, but on top of that there's a crap load of people that are willing to fight in massive numbers, and you can't really find any particular state to take over for a tax system to be functional, because everybody is decentralized and therefore there's no resources to centralize over. So therefore decentralization is key to producing a prosperous society. Now as far as these tribes go, once they did go to war with Spain or Portugal for the most part, they still lived on. And I mean, like some people like to be stupid enough to say like these tribes died off and they're extinct, blah blah blah. They're not extinct. Like people do the same thing with Jewish people. Like Jewish people, are the most heavily persecuted people in the world, but you see that the Ashkenazi Jewish tribes are still there all over the world. Like they just pass their genes on to other cultures, and you see why Jews are hated, because people look at Jews as like I'm not going to get into the religious psychopathy over it, but they think of Jews as second class humans. They're not people, and they have like a messed up worldview of like using usury and all that messed up BS. But the truth of the matter is like their culture has always been around for a long time, and whatever little bit of culture that they had, they still brought it with them. So I would even say like with what these Indian tribes had, their bloodline is still active all over the Central, South, and Caribbean Americas. Now, as far as the tribes that actually did modernize and they wanted to expand, they're still doing fine. Everybody's still producing, their ideas and what they believe in as far as indigenous heritage, and I do believe that is beneficial. Now, for the expansion of these countries now, like I would even say, like, we'll even go with like South America. That's a great example of these developing nations. Um, like I'll even use like Argentina or Brazil or Chile, or like I can even go with maybe Venezuela. Like, why these nations in South America, leading to the Central and Caribbean, are still doing poor. And I will say, honestly, it's really just due to poor education and the massive support for the massive nationalization of socialism. And I would say that's always been like the biggest problem, because if you really think about it, like these countries would easily prosper if their people were not pushing for the idea of communism or fascism alone. And I think that the best country that has the ability to push for a more free market based uh mixed economy society, and I guess if you want to say in a more less authoritarian democratic order, probably in a more minarchist point of view, um I would say that the country that has like the highest probability to probably get there, um I don't know, I'd probably say maybe Brazil has a good chance of doing that, because there is a good large libertarian population that is getting its way. But I do believe Brazil is still improving with its economic fluidity. And it's not to say like South America can't be as good as, let's just say, like the United States. Like, they can. It's just that, the people that live there probably have been, screwed over philosophically with so much government brainwashing to believe that socialism is like the right way to live. And it's like, no, it's not. Like, people are living pretty bad, and that's why you see so many people leaving South America, because they want to find like a better way of life, especially either going up to Central America, or they'll probably go out to the US. So I would say, honestly, the main root of the issue is simply just bad economics of their national policies that their governments do, and just like the massive centralization of socialism being such a massive attraction out there. Because really, let the nations that some racist idiots like to say that are like really high in density of like a white population, which I'll get into like the race part later, but they'll say like, oh well, look at nations like Argentina or Uruguay or even Brazil in a way, and it's like they have such a massive white population, but still they live like crap. And it's like, the truth is like, the demographics of their colonial ancestry does not add up to the end goal of what they wanted to do, because they're still failing despite having all these different races being diverse. And the truth of the matter is, like, the people that are doing good are probably the people that hated them in the first place, and probably hated the state that was already centralizing a lot of its resources away, therefore making those countries more desperate around them, because you create too much political division. And like I said about colonialism in my other videos, that's what all colonial militaries do. They create too much division, and then once they end up getting beaten out by the people that hate them, then the power vacuum starts to begin, with many other political factions being created in response to it. So I would say that's how South America ended up failing a lot more, because, colonialism is really a coin flip of a lot of good or bad outcomes. And the good is really, the state doing a lot of stupid crap. and oppressing people in a bad way, because it's not going to produce prosperous free market, expansion, and actually give people the right view of capitalism in front of them to say, wow, like life is so much better because of this. No, it's not. Using violence to create a peaceful society doesn't work like that. So, to make this simplistic, I would say South America is only doing bad because it's simply due to a lack of bad education of what the people are being given there. And I think if that wasn't there, these South American countries would very well be educated more, and they would basically get rid of their colonial structure that was already destroying their nations a lot more. Because if you think about it, like when you have colonial empires that have tried to screw people over in other parts of the world, these people end up listening to what the colonial settlers try to say to them. And then when they understand that they're wrong and they're more educated, they usually end up destroying all the influence around them. Now, I'm not the one to support book burning, but I am the one to support the idea that if your people don't like bad influences of history in your community, you should have the ultimate right to destroy those ideas around you, because those people are not your people. These are people that have invaded your ancestry of your original ancestors, and therefore you have every right to speak out against it because it's not your heritage. Because these are people that are trying to force their own ideas onto you, indiscriminately, against your consent, obviously. But yeah, that's pretty much it. With South America, that's the same thing with Central America. I don't need to dig into all the politics of why Mexico, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, and all those nations are doing bad. But I guess the main, concerns right now with other countries, especially in the Caribbean, would be definitely the Dominican Republic, definitely Haiti, definitely Cuba, and like I'll talk about Jamaica and Puerto Rico. I don't need to be talking about all the other little islands like Barbados, Antigua, uh, what like Saint 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 Vincent or Saint Mary or some shit like that, or the Virgin Islands. Like no, like those are all obviously like Taino or Kalinago mixed tribes, especially with like Trinidad. But like I don't put Trinidad, like a part of the Caribbean. It's really an island that's part of South America. That's like bordered right by Venezuela. But yeah, Trinidad is not part of the Caribbean in my honest opinion. But yeah, as far as those nations go, I think honestly, primarily due to Cuba and Puerto Rico and the DR, um, those nations obviously have a lot of political corruption. And I'll even start with Puerto Rico because obviously Puerto Rico is viewed as a U.S. territory, aka a colony. But in all retrospect, it's really its own country that has been invaded by other countries. It's a nation under invasion. That's really what I call it. Those are basically invaded territories that were invaded by other, uh, you know, foreign, invaders or colonial invaders. So pretty much the whole deal with Puerto Rico is like the government is very, very corrupt, I can tell. And a lot of people are still not happy with after what they did with, like, I guess, like forcing the previous governor to resign and all that. I guess a lot of political destruction is still being put in place because a lot of Puerto Ricans are definitely arguing over the premise that Puerto Rico is basically getting displaced, and that I can agree because Puerto Rico is definitely not being the island that it's heavily known for. And I think the reason why that's happening is simply due to the fact that the United States is actually trying to force Puerto Ricans to move out of Puerto Rico. And I'm not too sure if that's even true, but it seems like, based off of the economic destruction that Puerto Rico is being forced under by U.S. law, on top of the people being uneducated, yeah, that's a recipe for disaster. I don't want to see Puerto Rico go to a civil war. I have a feeling that civil war is preeminent, and if that does happen, it's not going to be a good moment. It's going to be a lot of people getting sacrificed for the wrong reasons. And yeah, that's pretty much how I see it. I mean, it's not really looking good. It's definitely looking like a really bad outcome for a lot of destructive ideas to come. But I think the reason why Puerto Rico is really doing bad economically is just simply due to the United States economically, you know, placing a lot of political political restrictions onto the people. So therefore, they can keep begging for more resources from the U.S. and it's not really doing good. It's basically like mercantilist slavery in a way. That's really what I would call it. Same thing with with the Dominican Republic. I do believe that the DR they're doing bad simply due to the fact that um, they're being held back by a lot of government policies that's holding its economy to be very borderline socialist. A lot of things are definitely inflated out there. It's not the same like the U.S. where you could buy like a good amount of resources and be good for a good 3 to 6 plus months. I do believe, however, when it comes down to it, it's more to do with what the people really want and what are they really pushing for. And I think the DR sadly is turning into like one of those once beautiful islands that that the that the Tainos have left behind, and it's like it's turning into a colonial hellhole where it's just like, yeah, so the DR defeated the colonial invaders, and that being Spain, and that being let the French by probably kicking their ass too, because obviously Haiti tried invading them for whatever fucking reason that was meant to be, for the stupidest of reasons. But it's like, dude, like the DR is just like, it just keeps getting worse and worse, and I don't know if I'm probably visualizing it in a wrong way, but the DR is just, it's a terrible land. It's not doing good. It's doing bad. So yeah, that's pretty much it with what I have with the DR. I know that the DR can definitely do good. Puerto Rico can easily thrive very well. A lot of its ports can very well be used for so much economic resources globally, and it would thrive like every single year with so much innovation and lots of economic expansions with I guess like whatever companies that want to come out of their way to make the island better. And that's how I see it with like the DR too, because that the DR would easily be a very good society as far as what people want out of the DR. And I think the DR can easily produce a lot of great economic fluidity for the island. But I'd say until then, the DR definitely needs to fix itself economically, and definitely screw the state over, get the state eliminated. But yeah, I think the DR will head back into its old roots, and freedom will definitely take over in the coming future, in due time. But yeah, let's talk about Cuba. Cuba has always been a very difficult country to review, and I'm not too sure if Cuba is socialist. still with being communist, but I would say Cuba is definitely in a very, very bad spot. Cuba is not doing any better. The country is still producing very little income for the people, and I'm sure the people are starving and dying out there. It's just bad because it's like, they're not doing anything effectively, and they're just kind of making a lot of BS decisions, especially from the state. And I think they're doing that deliberately because they're just trying to prove to the world that socialism, still works with communism. And it's like, that's not going to help you. Like, communism is already dying, but it's like, you're continuing the political machine to make people more angry and more, I guess, like politically resistant against communism. So I think communism in Cuba will die. The real question is like, how long is it really gonna take before seeing, like, I guess, like the mass revolution of people that want to kill off, like, I guess, Fidel Castro and his daughter or whatever. And it's like, you know, I kind of wish like people actually did that, because it's like Cuba deserves a lot better, and I personally don't want to see Cuba turn into another like colonial hellhole where they have to basically be desperate to like invade other countries, which I think Cuba would very well do it, because it's like, think about it, like they're a island that has been breeding a lot of communism over the last like 50 plus years, like basically, you know after Cuba became independent, or after Cuba regained its independence. It's not like it became independent. Like, Cuba's been around for thousands of years with the Taino population. Long live Taino nation. But it's like, no, Cuba is not doing good because there were already bad actors put in place, where the Cuban government was following a lot of bad ideals, and therefore that's how communism came about, because communism wasn't established in Cuba, I believe, up until, I want to say, like the early 1950s. That makes about right, but I could be wrong, because I think Cuban communism has been around for a good amount of time. Yeah, 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 like it's been around for a pretty good, time frame. So, it's not doing good. It's obviously, going into a massive hellhole. But if Cuba does keep this up, Cuba will very well become like another communist Russia in a way, where don't be surprised if Russia or China starts aiding them with like high level weapons. And like, I'm not really afraid of China. Like, China can go f off, but China will make sure that they have garrisons ready for them, where they're able to like use whatever technology for their soldiers. And if they want to be like I guess like the Cuban military that you see from like Call of Duty Black Ops 2, then I don't want to see that. I want to see Cuba become a successful island once again, and see the bloodline do very well. Obviously, it's probably not going to happen because a lot of people are, still at war with each other, and I think the people that are winning are usually the people that are running the ruling class. That's advocating for a lot of Cubans to get killed, and I think that's really the main issue. Like, the government is that corrupt to like allow communism to go as long as it goes. And it's like, I say, until the people have had enough, freedom fighters will start to come out. But it's just when. And I think Cuba is just deliberately doing that for the sake of, political, attention. But I like Cubans, they're good people, and I would like to see Cuba basically rebuilt to a much better societal order. But I'm sure that they'll do fine. It's just that they need to work more on, the concept of, understanding libertarianism ideas. And I think once they get rid of the colonial aspect behind it, of like looking at freedom as a means of being evil when they should be looking at it as a means of savior and hope and justice. Um, yeah, I think eventually that will spark. It just takes a massive minority of people to come together to start pushing for that, and I think Cuba has a really good spot in people's hearts to do that. So I would hope they do that for the ancestral bloodline. Cuba's a very beautiful island as far as what it looks like, and it definitely deserves better. But yeah, yeah. Let me kind of talk about like the whole race BS with Hispanic nations being white in certain areas, but they're so poor. This has always been a kind of like a common argument with like a lot of stupid race realists, but they'll be dumb enough to say that the reason why Hispanic nations are doing bad is because their white populations are not being educated enough on how to be independent and how to be responsible with their lives. So therefore, these nations would be great because they are white, but the white people that are living there are not the problem. It's probably due to the minorities that are giving them a lot of issues. And then the truth of the matter is that colonialism is the problem of these race realists. These race realists are very retarded. They have a very eugenics minded worldview on things. They think that anything that's not their skin color is considered the enemy. So the thing is like they go off of a really retarded point of saying that the reason why us whites are doing worse or doing better is because of nonsensical factors that they bring up. And they just say that to say it because they don't have anything else better to say factually. So they'll find ways to lie about it because they don't have a better life to do other than lie. Now, as far as these countries go being white and these Hispanic nations, the reason why they're doing bad is not because of the people's skin color. It's really due to government. Yeah, the same people that you support that would be considered your Lord and Savior, aka Jesus Christ, retard lovers. Now, to break this down, let's just say if their white populations do die out, and let's just say the indigenous American Indian populations were becoming the minority or becoming the majority again, does that principle still apply with like whoever is dominating the racial demographics, right? To populate a nation means that the country will be either smarter or dumber based on race. Because if that's true, then white people are actually the problem because whites are not as smart compared to other races, that being Asians and blacks, could be smarter than them. It's mostly Asians, according to the American standard of quote unquote IQ, but the whites are not really doing as good compared to Asians as far as skill level. Now, for me, I don't believe in that because IQ doesn't mean anything to me. IQ doesn't, measure how smart you're gonna be operating your life. But the truth of the matter is like intelligence isn't measured by skin color. Intelligence is measured by how much you're willing to put in the work to be successful and actually make a good lifestyle out of what you do. So, yeah, to finalize this, these Hispanic nations that are white or basically mixed or whatever, the race, ethnicity, BS doesn't matter. These people have differences of political ideas that, revolve mostly around utilizing certain frameworks to be comfortable in what they believe in. And I would say once they start being more successful in their own nations, that's where statism alone will be at risk, and people will start to lose a lot more control as life goes on. So I don't think it's really about skin color. It's really just about ethics and values at the end of the day. As long as you have good ethics and principles, the skin color does not matter to develop a very successful society from scratch. So I think that day is coming for those nations, and I hope it does. So yeah, that's pretty much what I have to say. Happy Hispanic Heritage Month to all my fellow Hispanics. Well, to all my Hispanic friends, and shout out to all my Puerto Rican people. If they're watching this video, much love to all of you. Dakrobuk, Dakata, uh, Barikwa Naku, yeah, or Barikwa Naku of Apuchi. So yeah, that's pretty much what I gotta say. I think as far as maybe like other videos, I'll probably talk about indigenous culture stuff and all that other stuff, but I just wanted to get this off my system. But hope you guys enjoyed my like my long TED talk, and yeah, I will see you guys later. So all right, peace out. I'll see you guys. Bye.